We see it all around us on social media, plaques and bumper stickers. We are presented with sayings and quotes that try to instill some hope or offer words of encouragement. But what does the Bible say about applying knowledge? Let's look past the catchy one-liners and empty promises as we turn to Scripture and discover what wisdom really looks like.
Good morning. Man, it is good to be back in the house of the Lord with y'all. This morning, as you heard Andy reference, we are starting a new study in the book of Proverbs. So today we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. You want to begin to make your way there, Proverbs 1, 1 to 7. If you aren't familiar with how to use the Bible, you have a paper copy of it. You can find a table of contents at the front of the Bible. It's going to let you know how to locate the book of Proverbs. And just as we make our way through, the large numbers are chapters and the small numbers are verses. If you have a cell phone, it's essentially the same thing. Just kind of tap your way there. Proverbs is roughly there in the middle. Proverbs 1, 1 to 7. Let me read this for us and then take us once more to the Lord in prayer. It says, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Would you pray with me? Father, this morning as we come into this place, we recognize that for many of us, the way that we go about our lives is just making decisions based on pragmatism. So if it works, we do it. And you call for this radical reorienting of our hearts, that we would begin with an understanding of who you are, and from there we would appropriate knowledge and make decision. And so God, I just pray that you give us clarity over these next couple of months for some ways that we're going to be challenged, for some different ways of thinking that's going to come before us that we've not yet considered. And I just pray that we would do that in submission to your Spirit in all things. Father, I pray that it would be a profitable time and that we would come away from this being a wiser people. We're able to engage effectively in the communities that you've called us to live, you've called us to work, and you've called us simply to be salt and light in. Father, this morning we want to pray for the churches across our community that, oh my goodness, it's just amazing to hear the stories of salvations that have come out from last week as churches all across this area celebrated the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And men and women and children responded to the call of your Spirit in their lives to confess Christ as Lord, to forsake their sin, to turn and to follow Jesus. And so, God, we celebrate with them, and we pray that today that they would be strengthened and encouraged as they are likely just exhausted from all the effort they expended leading up to Easter, the different activities, the outreaches, and all these things. God, that today that they would find themselves energized, equipped, excited to serve you yet again. God, we pray for their pastors that they would effectively, powerfully, convincingly communicate your word to the people that you have given to them to be the shepherd over them. God, I pray that you would just help us to do well, partnering with the other churches of our community. God, I pray that you would just help us to do well, thinking well of them, praying for them, and partnering with them. God, would you be with us in this time this morning as we give ourselves to the study of your word, and would you bring and make application to our hearts by the power of your Spirit? In Christ's name, they said, amen. Amen. So listen, as we begin Proverbs, as we open it up, if you have the Amplified Bible, one of the things the Amplified says, when you kind of go through there and you're working through verse 1, it says Proverbs, and then in parentheses it says truths obscurely expressed. And there's a little bit of Proverbs and kind of reading it that feels like that. There's some things we're going to come across and you're just like, that's a really curious way to put that. That's a really odd way to say that. But one of the things we recognize in Proverbs is it gives great clarity that we desperately need today. In a culture that's so upside down and confused, what we recognize is that Proverbs helps us to see through that and to navigate that. If you were to read the book of Judges, one of the things you'll see in the book of Judges time and again is it says, in those days there was no king and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. If we were to look at our day and to make a similar statement, what it would likely be for our day is in those days, everyone was their own king and they did what was right in their own eyes. And what we have in the book of Proverbs is a set of corrective lenses to that approach that leads us away from self-determination. It leads us away from a culture that's pulling hard against the word of God, and it anchors us solidly in the wisdom that Scripture gives forth for us for how to live, for how to engage, and for how to set our course in life. Now, here's a fair warning. Over the next 8 weeks, there's going to be an opportunity for all of us to be offended. So can you just say, ouch, that hurt? Already, look, we've not gotten into it, but listen. And so it may be helpful for you. Go out and buy a pair of steel-toe boots, right? Buy a pair of steel-toe boots and then just wear them to church on Sundays as a reminder that you're going to get your toes stepped on. But man, that's good for us. It is good for us to be challenged. It's good for our perspectives to be reevaluated. It's good for us to take ourselves into this reminder that we need to live in submission to God's word. So we're going to address communication. We're going to look at laziness and hard work. We're going to look at money. We're going to have 2 weeks where we address the subject of sex and what it looks like in our culture and what the Bible says about it and how to respond to that. We're going to have a week where Zach Burke is going to preach to us on parenting. And so there's a number of different opportunities to be offended. Isn't that awesome? I'm so looking forward to that. I may skip the parenting one. Just kidding. No, that's going to be really helpful, and I look forward to being offended with you. And so as we journey through today, let's just begin to think of how to understand verses 1 through 7 in terms of kind of the who, what, why, and how of Proverbs. So let's look at the who to start off with. Proverbs is largely written or compiled and edited by Solomon. Now, you'll see other places in there where it says the Proverbs of Azur, the Proverbs of Hezekiah, but largely, as chapter 1 begins, it's the Proverbs of Solomon. So it becomes important for us to understand who Solomon is. If you didn't grow up in church, you have no familiarity with the Old Testament begins with a king named Saul. Saul loses the kingdom. It goes to a man named David, and he's the one from whom the line of the Messiah, Jesus, flows. Now, David's first son, or the son that becomes the king after him, is a man named Solomon. And when Solomon became king in the book of 1 Kings, actually, which is an accounting of the history, in chapter 3, verses 3 through 9, this is what it says. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father, only he sacrificed and made offerings in the high places. And when the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place, Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream, and God said, ask what I shall give you. Solomon said, you've shown great steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and uprightness of heart towards you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on this throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in the place of David, your father, my father. Although I am but a little child, and I don't know how to go out or to come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you've chosen a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to govern this great people of yours? So what does Solomon say? Man, this is a difficult job. I'm really young. I don't really know what to do. You're telling me I can ask for whatever I want. I want to know how to do my job and how to do it well. And that is wisdom, skill for living. And so God gives him wisdom. In 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 29 through 34, it says, and God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand of the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the east and of all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all other men. And then he takes time to name some of them. He says, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Haman, and Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. And his fame was in all the surrounding nations. He also spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He spoke of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the wall. He also spoke of beasts, and of birds, and of reptiles, and of fish. And people of all nations came to hear the wisdom of Solomon from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. So that's the who. That's who we attribute much of the book of Proverbs to. But let's look at the what. So when we understand Proverbs, it's really, really important that we begin to understand the nature of what Proverbs is and kind of how it's constructed. So if you're to look at the book just as a whole, notice this, that chapters 1 through 9 really give us an extended discourse on the subject of wisdom. And so wisdom personified, wisdom and how it's operating, wisdom and what it does. And then in chapters 10 through 31, we see this shift, this change, and really what we begin to find in that is a lot more of what you and I and probably others of us who have heard of the book of Proverbs but haven't really studied it very much would expect. And that is largely pithy sayings. So short, compact statements chock full of truth. And so I want us to look at a couple of them by way of example. Proverbs 15:1 reads, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." It's one of these pithy sayings. And so it's one of these things that's decidedly helpful. So you happen to find yourself at work tomorrow and your boss, he or she, whatever monster you want to name them as, they come into your office and they say, "Did you enjoy your break?" And you're like, "What break?" And they're like, "Exactly, get back to work." And they're just like berating you and just on and all these things and just kind of dressing you down and just all your hair is nasty and your clothes are disgusting and your work ethic is atrocious. And, just all the things you love to hear on a Monday morning. It's just so helpful. And so you remember, I remember something helpful from a sermon, first time ever. And so Proverbs 15:1, "A soft answer turns away wrath." This sure feels like wrath. And you say something like, "Isn't it a lovely Monday?" And then your mind goes completely blank because you realize it's not at all a wonderful Monday. And so you recover and you say something along the lines of, "I'm not sure it's really helpful for me to do the things you're asking me to do if you're going to address me in such a manner." And you're thinking, this is a soft answer. This is really helpful. But instead, what you hear back is rah, 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 rah. Something it's mixed between Finnish and Russian. It sounds like two dragons in a fight, and you're fairly certain it's directed at you. Well, let's look at the second one of these. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it." So it is this short, compact statement. But the difficulty becomes, for many of us, what we recognize is we do train up our children in the way that they would go. We do pour out our lives. We keep the word of God before them. We keep them in church, even when it's shut down. I see some of you in the parking lot just waiting for us to open. And so you are dedicated to raise your child in the fear and admonition of the Lord. But what you've recognized is your kids grow up, they walk away from the faith. And so you come back to this and you're like, hold on a second, did I understand this correctly? And you read it again. "I trained up a child in the way that he or she should go, but they're old and they're departing from it." And the difficulty becomes you've misunderstood the nature of Proverbs. You see, Proverbs aren't written to be promises to depend on, but they're written to represent general truisms. So when we begin to understand that they're not promises, this isn't God making a deal with you saying, listen, if you raise your kids up in the way that they should go, ain't no way they can walk away when they get older. It's not that. It'd be great if it was, but it's not. Because what you'll recognize is that your children have to come to faith on their own. Your job as a parent is to keep them in the word, to display for them what it looks like to passionately follow Jesus, to rest and trust in his grace when you fail, but they make the decision to follow Jesus or to walk out on Jesus on their own. These are general truisms and not promises, and it's so incredibly important for us as we consider. Now, we've looked at kind of the who, we've looked at the what the nature of Proverbs is, but let us consider the why. Why do we have the Proverbs? Well, it begins, it says, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, the king of Israel, and then he lists 4 different reasons. He says it is to know, to receive, to give, and to understand. Verse 2, to know. Verse 3, to receive. Verse 4, to give. And verse 6, to understand. This is why he's given them to us. So let us begin to work down through this. So let's look at the idea of to know in verse 2. He says it is to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight. So what does it mean to know? Surely it can't simply mean to acquire information and to possess information. What it instead means is to come to understand, to appropriate, and then live out that experience. So to know means a whole lot more than just simply to kind of have in your head this empty-headed approach to Christianity. And so when he says what we are to know, he says we are to know, and the first thing he says is wisdom. Now, wisdom, I don't know about for you, but for me, wisdom really looks like Gandalf with a pipe, right? And so he's walking along, he's got this beard, and he's kind of spitting out all this folksy wisdom where you're like, yes, that's so good, I love it. But wisdom isn't that. Wisdom is experience for living. It is a skill for living. So what wisdom is taking knowledge, working it around, and then applying it to a situation. So we know how to navigate given situations in such a way that display our reverence of God and our desire to follow him in all things. So that's what it is to know wisdom. And so what this book offers us is skills for living. What it offers you, what it offers me is a how-to guide to navigate the world that we currently live in. And so it is to know wisdom, and it's also to know instruction. Now, instruction isn't like a set of IKEA instructions where it's a whole lot of cartoon characters and somehow you take random pieces and then in the end, 5 minutes later, you have a desk, which never works, right? Those are the worst instructions ever. But instruction in this, within Solomon's mind, is rather you go through a situation, you experience a negative consequence, and you alter the way you engage. So let's say, for example, that every Sunday I walk in, I come down this aisle, and Brian and Carla are here on the edge, and they trip me every single Sunday. I don't know why they're so rude, but that's just what they do. That's just the way God has made them, God bless them, right? And so every Sunday they do that. And so when I walk in, it's, oh my goodness, would you stop it? And oh my goodness, would you stop it? Well, I'm gonna quit walking down this aisle. Why? Because he has made me to know instruction. And so some of us, as we work our way through the book of Proverbs, we're going to come across things. It's going to be like this light bulb moment of you where you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't know God's word addressed this. I've been experiencing this so poorly. And maybe you're in there with your boss and she yells at you and you yell back at her and it's this shouting match. And then all of a sudden HR busts in and says, to go to your corners, everybody be kind. I need an incident report from you and you and you. And you're just stuck doing paperwork all Monday. But you would have read Proverbs, you would have known, soft answer turns away wrath, and your boss is the one filling out paperwork, and you're over there playing Tetris or whatever it is you do the rest of the day when you're not working. That's what we have. We understand wisdom, we understand instruction. Look at verse 3. He says, it is to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. I want us to see the idea of what it looks like to apply righteousness in terms of our speech and our actions. Turn to chapter 10 in the book of Proverbs. Chapter 10, verses 31 and 32. When you've got it, somebody y'all got it. Y'all are so sharp. Look at what he says. The mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom. But the perverse tongue will be cut off. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked, what is perverse. So one of the things he says is, as you read, as you engage, as you learn from the Proverbs, it alters the way we speak. It alters the way we speak in terms of righteousness, revealing the righteousness of God in how we speak. And so both in what we say and how we say it, and in terms of verse 32, what we don't say. There are things for the righteous that we do and don't say. And let's look at it in terms of our actions. Chapter 12 and verse 21. Chapter 12 and verse 21. This is one of these general truisms. He says, no ill befalls the righteous, but the wicked are filled with trouble. Now, occasionally in this life, we see the truth of this. We'll see people who engage in wickedness, they break laws, and there is a justice met for them, right? And so that something happens to them in their actions. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And we're going along and we're being righteous in all that we're doing, and we're being righteous in all our engagement. And because of the way our culture is, because of the way people are, because of the way that sin operates in the world, we suffer consequences for our actions. But what we read in this, what we see in this connects to a promise we find in the New Testament, that ultimately God upholds his righteousness. That God upholds his righteousness. And so we entrust ourselves not to the people of this world, but we entrust ourselves to our God who rewards righteousness forevermore. Amen? Let's look at it in terms of equity. Flip over a couple of pages likely. Proverbs 14:31. 14:31. So Proverbs helps us to receive instruction, training, in terms of applying equity. Equity is fair treatment of all people. It says, whoever oppresses a poor man insults his, everybody say, maker. But he who is generous to the needy honors him. And so when we find ourselves out, and you're out in community and you see somebody standing or sitting with a sign that says, we'll work for food, or just need money for a bus ticket, I'm heading here, there, or wherever, there's this tendency within our minds to think that this person is there because of some bad decision or set of bad decisions they've made. And then you begin to draw conclusions on this person and on their parents and their failings and all these various things. And by the time you leave the intersection, you've crafted a whole narrative on this person. So whether you've ever spoken a word to them, you've dishonored them in your mind. You've dishonored them in your attitudes, and you've dishonored them in your refusal to engage and to treat them as a person worthy of respect and honor. And why does Solomon say, or why does the author of Proverbs say that we've done this? Because we've not just dishonored them, but we've dishonored their maker. God creates all humanity in his image and in his likeness. And as image bearers of God, Genesis 1:26 and 27, every person is worthy of honor and respect. And so in terms of equity, we need to pay the same respect to people who are going to be kind to us, do nice stuff for us, give us money, remember us in their will. If you're writing a will, it's MATTHEWALANBEASLEY. We'll talk socials later. But listen, we have this tendency to be really kind to people who can do nice stuff for us, and to completely disregard people that are either difficult, they demand too much from us, or they can't contribute anything good to us. But what does he call us to do? Proverbs teaches us to treat all peoples with equity. It teaches us to engage with everyone fairly. And in so doing, to model the goodness of God, and in so doing, to honor not just this person, but to honor their maker. The next thing it says in verse 4, it says, as we read the Proverbs, as we engage the Proverbs, it's going to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. And so really we see two classes of people. The first class of persons is the simple or the naive. So this person, they've never really been exposed to the wisdom of God. It's not that they're just walking away and they're antagonistic towards it. They've simply just never been taught. There's nothing wrong inherently that this person is doing. They just have an absence of information. So what Proverbs does is it comes to the one who is simple, it comes to the one who is naive, it comes to the one who is ill-informed, and it equips them. Now, the second class of this was youth or children. And so one of the roles that we begin to recognize that this operates in is equipping of our children and equipping of our students. And so if you're a parent, if you're a guardian, a grandparent, if you're a person who spends a significant amount of time with younger people, then one of the things that Proverbs says to us in Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 24, listen to this, He says, whoever spares the rod, everybody say hates his son. But he who, everybody say loves. He who loves him is diligent to discipline him. So when we begin to think in terms of discipline, some of us begin to think, my parents must have really, really, really loved me, right? But if you're a parent, if you're a guardian in this place, it is your job, it is your assigned task to discipline your children, to help them experience discipline. And you do this not because you hate them and want to see pain introduced into their lives, but because you love them and you want to save them from pain. Now, there are a couple of ways that we can do this. One is by virtue of natural consequence. So your kids are out and they do something and they suffer some natural consequence from their behavior. You've told them to put up their bike. You've told them to put up their bike. They left their bike out time and time again, and their bike is stolen. So a natural consequence of this could be you have no bike. You told them, put your phone up, put your phone up, put your phone up. Don't wear it in your pocket when you go on a hike. They lose their phone. A natural consequence of this could be they have no phone anymore. We short circuit the process for our children to be able to grow in discipline and instruction when we never let them experience the natural consequences of their actions. Amen. Y'all, this is what it is to be a parent. This is what it is to be a guardian. Sometimes our kid, and this is my favorite as a kid, somehow by the grace of God, I escaped natural consequences. And when I escaped natural consequences, read into this, I was never found out. My prayer before God was, I've learned my lesson. It's enough I feel real, real bad. They don't need to know. It's between you and me, big guy. I sure love you. You're the tops. Just so you know, my parents have done some wrong too. But sometimes my parents would find out, and then they would move from natural consequence to creative consequence. So they would tailor consequences perfectly matched for whatever rebellion I was engaged in. And that's your job as a parent. There is not a one-size-fits-all response to disciplining our kids. God has created your kids to be raised in your home by you, that you might be an expert on doling out discipline for them. He's entrusted their heart to you. And while they live with you, you have an opportunity to engage in the formation of their character. And some of that is through the avenue of discipline. Now, let's just say you're in this room and you're like, oh, I really despise my parents. They're the worst. Well, let's just go there, okay? So if you're a child or a student in this place, I want you to hear Proverbs 13:1. A wise son or daughter hears their father or their mother's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. And so you have a choice. Are you going to listen, or are you going to receive? Are you going to learn from the lived experience, the skills for living from those God has placed over you, or are you going to reject it? And in so rejecting it, in some sense, you're rejecting God. This is what he calls us to do as students and children, is to receive the instruction of our parents, the discipline of our parents, and to learn from their lived experience. Some of the reasons your parents punish you for things is because they did boneheaded things so much worse than that when they were a child, when they were a student, and they want you to escape the penalties, the punishments they experienced. And they're trying to help you to navigate bad decisions. And so what the Word of God calls you to is to hear what they're having to say and to apply it to your life. Now, let's just say in a room this size, there are some of us in this room, you don't have godly parents. You don't have godly examples for you. So when your parents dispense discipline on you, it's harsh, it's unloving. In a word, it's cruel, and potentially it's abusive. This is not for you. My hope for you, my prayer for you is that you would go to Zach, you go to Brittany, you go to someone in this church who you see following and loving Jesus well, and tell them, I want somebody to help guide me. I want somebody to walk along with me. I want somebody that when I make a stupid decision, that I can go to them and to say, y'all, I know this was boneheaded. Would you help me to walk in a corrected way? And that's what we want to be for you. That's what we want to help you with. And so one of the things, in verse 4 it said, the Proverbs give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Now, verse 5, as we come into it, it really speaks to those of us who say, I have arrived, I've got all the wisdom I can handle, and I know that because I dispense it to everybody around me, whether they want it or not. But look what verse 5 is. It is a call to remember that none of us ever arrive at an end place of wisdom. In fact, he says, let the wise hear and increase in learning. If you are wise in this place, if you have reached a status where people are coming to you and they're soliciting your input and asking for your help, the book of Proverbs still offers you yet greater wisdom. It still beckons you to come to drink from the waters from the fount of God's wisdom. It says the one who understands can obtain guidance. So you already understand, you know how to navigate, but still there is a greater place for you to go. Finally, verse 6 gives us what we really thought Proverbs was likely all about. It is to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. So what verse 6 essentially says is that Proverbs equips you for understanding life. It equips you for understanding life. Now, as we've kind of moved through the what, we move through the why, we make it then to verse 7 and finally the how. Look at verse 7 again with me. He says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So y'all, there's a way to go through the book of Proverbs, to walk away from it at the end totally informed, but not wise. The only way to go through Proverbs to be both informed and wise, skillful for the way that we're to live life, is to approach Proverbs in the fear of the Lord. So when we begin to understand what it looks like to fear the Lord, we recognize that there's kind of this dual component to it. So on the one hand, it's humility, and on the other, it is reverence. So the fear of the Lord is both humility and reverence. And so when we understand humility is essentially looking at God and apprising who God is and who we are and saying he is all powerful, he is all good, and I am frail, broken, and dependent upon him. So if I understand myself as a person who is frail, broken, and dependent upon him, this puts me in a place of humility because it's not bolstering myself. It's not letting myself get all puffed up. It's not depending on my own skills, my own ability. So it puts me in a place, in a heart disposition, in a mind reflection to see God for who he is. And so there's humility. There's also the idea of reverence. When we begin to reflect on the essence of who God is and what God does, we recognize that he and he alone is worthy of worship and that he and he alone is entitled to our worship. And so the book of Proverbs calls us to approach God as humble worshipers who delight on his law and come to know and understand him and apply his word to our lives. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. But what has he said about the fool? Notice in verse 7 that he's not contrasting the fool versus the wise. He's saying this is how the fool views instruction and knowledge. They hate them. They despise them. And where does knowledge, where does instruction come from? It comes from the Lord. So essentially, the fool is the one who, in line with Psalm 14:1, says in his heart, there is no God. And since there is no God, he feels completely free to rebel against God's wisdom and against God's instruction. So the fool is the person who may grow in an understanding, okay, well, when my boss is yelling at me not yelling back at her or me not yelling back at him helps to diffuse the situation. So there are things they can learn, but they'll never read the book of Proverbs and walk away as a worshiper. And this is what Solomon desperately wants us to do. He wants to equip us with both the skill for living and the right way of engaging God, and that as a reverential worshiper of the one who is true and holy and mighty. Now, do you remember when we got to it in terms of the first two things that Solomon wrote, he says that we are to know and to receive. When we come into the New Testament, Jesus is speaking in Matthew 7 and verse 24, and he's talking about what it is to walk in wisdom. He says, the one who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like the wise man who built his house upon the rock. And so there's something that we can come to know. And in coming to know it, he leads us and calls us to apply it. Now, admittedly, the wisdom of the New Testament is contrary to the wisdom of this world. Paul, writing in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 24, said that Christ is the wisdom of God. And when engaging the Corinthians, what Paul chose to engage them with, to come back to over and over and over again, is Christ and him crucified. And he spoke of Christ and him crucified. He said that it is a stumbling block to Jews and it is a folly to Greeks. So when Jews heard about one who is hanging on a cross, they said this one was cursed. When the Greeks heard about a God who died, they said this is insanity. But still he came to it over and over and over again. To truly understand wisdom is to understand wisdom through the pathway of Jesus, who is the wisdom of God, Christ crucified. And Christ calls us to be those who both know and receive, that we know him as God and we receive his forgiveness for our sins. And in kindness, we are those who, equipped with the skills for living, go forth from this place, calling yet others to know and to receive.